Chapter 3, Section 5, we're going to learn about a system of non-linear equations. So we have dealt with systems of linear equations before, so where we used elimination and substitution to solve. So we're kind of doing the same thing, but here we have non-linear, so we'll have some quadratic equations. So this is just what it looked like if you were to solve by graphing. If you have a parabola, so remember an x squared type of graph would look like a parabola, and like a y equals mx plus b would look like a line. And if they didn't overlap, you have no solution. If they overlap in one spot, there's one solution, and if the two lines or the two graphs overlap in two spots, there's two solutions. Same thing also works when you have two parabolas. You could have either no solutions, one solution, or two solutions. So first thing we're going to do is solving a nonlinear system by substitution. So just like when we did substitution in the past, we always want one of them to be either x equals or y equals. So for substitution, this always has to be the first step. And then we always need it to be the equation that is not the squared one. So here we have x squared, so I would want it to be y equals. So not the x squared one. So in our equation here, we want it to be y equals. So I'm not getting my first equation to be y equals because that has the x squared one, the x squared term. So I want to work with my second equation. So I'm going to move the x to the other side because I want it to be y equals. So y is equal to 4 minus x. So once I have this 4 minus x, I'm going to take it and substitute it into the y into the other equation. So that is replacing the y. So my new first equation is x squared plus x minus y, which we said y is equal to 4 minus x, so minus 4 minus x, and that's equal to negative 1. So then from here, we're just going to need to solve. First thing I want to do is distribute that negative to both things in the parentheses behind it. So I have x squared plus x minus 4 plus x is equal to negative 1. So first thing I did was substitution. Then we simplified a little bit, and I'm going to simplify more and combine some like terms. So I'm going to move everything to one side because if we see here, I have an x squared, so that tells me I'm going to have to factor. So it has to be equal to 0, and then we're going to factor. So I'm going to add 1 to move it to the other side, combine it with that negative 4, and then combine my x's together. These are on the same side, so I don't subtract an x, I just add the two x's together. So it's x squared. X plus x would be 2x, and then negative 4 plus 1 would be negative 3. And now that it's equal to 0, I can factor. So I want to see what are two factors of negative 3 that add to 2. That would be 3 and negative 1. So I put it into my parentheses, x plus 3, x minus 1. This is equal to 0. We're trying to solve, so not just factor it. We need to solve it all the way through. So I'm going to set both of these little equations equal to 0. X plus 3 equals 0. X minus 1 equals 0. Subtract 3 on both sides. So x is equal to negative 3. Add 1 to both sides. So x is equal to 1. So these are my two solutions, but these are just x. And if we notice in our equation here, we have x's and y's, so I have to find the y that goes with each of these. So I'm going to work with one x at a time. So first I'm going to plug -3 into the x, because this is x equals -3. So that's going to go into the x here. I'm going to work with the second equation because it is going to be easier to plug in. So this would be -3 plus y is equal to 4. I add 3 to both sides. So y is equal to 7. So that y went with this 3. So my point here would be -3, 7. Remember, it's always x, then your y. Now I also have x is equal to 1. So I'm plugging that into x as well. It can be into the same equation, the second one, just because that one's going to be easier to work with. So I have 1 plus y is equal to 4. Subtract 1 on both sides, so y is equal to 3. So for my second answer here, I have x is equal to 1. So 1 comma, and when x is 1, y is 3. So these are my two answers. We'll have 2 coordinate points most of the time, sometimes, but remember, it could be no solution, could be one solution. But here we have 2. So for each different x, you have to plug that back in to find the y that goes along with it. Next, we're going to solve by elimination. So when we solve by elimination, we always want to cancel out the non-squared one. So here, since I have x squareds, x's, and y's, I want to cancel out the y's because I have multiple x's. So the y's are going to be easier to cancel, and that way we just work with x's. So here I already have a negative y and a positive y, so they're going to cancel, and I'm going to combine my like terms. So just be careful that you only add the x squared ones together. So these are like terms, these are like terms, and these are like terms. So just got to be careful combining your like terms. 2x squared plus x would be 3x squared. -5x plus 2x would be -3x. And then that's equal to -2 plus 0 would just be -2. So here, because I have an x squared and an x, I'm going to have to factor to solve. So I need it to be equal to 0. So I'm going to add 2 to the other side to get it to cancel. So I'll have it equal to 0. So 3x squared minus 3x plus 2 is equal to 0. Now we can factor. The only part here is that I have a number out front that is not 1. So to factor this, I have to multiply the first times the last. So 3 times 2 is 6. Now I need to find 2 factors of 6 that add to -3. We actually don't have 2 factors of 6 that add to -3. So when we can't factor it, we have to do the quadratic. The quadratic formula. So our quadratic formula is -b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac over 2a. This is our a, our b, and our c. So just going to plug everything in. This would be -3, which turns into +3, plus or minus the square root of -3 squared minus 4 times 3 times 2 over 2 times a, which is 3. So +3 plus or minus the square root of 9 minus 4 times 3 would be 12, and 12 times 2 is 24 over 6. And then I want to subtract inside the square root here. So 9 minus 24 would be -15. So 3 plus or minus the square root of -15 over 6 we cannot have negative inside of our square root because we know that would turn into an imaginary number, which is not a real solution. So this is an example of no solution. So if you can't factor, you have to do the quadratic. If you end up with a negative under your square root, that tells you there is no solution. All right, let's look at number 1 here. So number 1, I'm going to solve using substitution because I have a y equals and a y equals, so I can just take one of them and substitute it into the other y. So since y is equal to negative 4x plus 8, I'm going to plug that into y in the other equation. So negative 4x plus 8 is equal to negative x squared plus 4. Because I have an x squared and an x term, I'm going to have to factor. So that means we want it to be equal to 0. So I'm going to move everything to one side. I always like it when the x squared is positive, so that's going to be what I move to the other side because it's negative, so I want to make it positive by moving it over. So I add x squared to both sides, and I'll subtract 4 to both sides as well. So x squared minus 4x plus 4 is equal to 0. We want to find two factors of 4 that add to negative 4, so that would be negative 2 and negative 2. So x minus 2 and x minus 2 is equal to 0. So x minus 2 is equal to 0, and x minus 2 is equal to 0. Add 2 to both sides, add 2 to both sides, so x is equal to 2, and x is equal to 2. Because they're the same thing, you don't have to do it twice. So we would just use one of them. And we would want to plug it in. So we plug it in to find y. So it doesn't matter which equation you plug it into. I'm going to plug it into the second one just because that one is not squared. Just make sure you're plugging it into the x. So I have y is equal to negative 4 times 2 plus 8. So y is equal to negative 8 plus 8. So y is 0. That is fine. You can get 0. 0 is a number. 0 is a solution. That works. So x was 2. Y is 0. So this is my answer. This is one of those examples where we only get one solution because the second x ended up being the same thing. So it's the same answer. All right, let's take a look at another one. Let's do number 3. So here, I'm going to use elimination just to see something different. And notice that I have a positive y and a negative y. So I'm going to stop using substitution because I know that those y's will cancel out right off the bat. So I'm going to combine my like terms. So 2x squared plus x squared would be 3x squared. I have a 4x. I don't have any other x's, so it's just plus 4x. The y's cancel. And then it's equal to negative 2 plus 2 would be 0. Now, since we have an x squared and an x, we know we're going to have to factor. So when we factor, it has to be equal to 0. It's already equal to 0, so we can go ahead and factor. Now, this doesn't look like a normal factoring question because we don't have that c term. But it's fine. We want to take out the greatest common factor. So I'm going to factor using GCF. So my greatest common factor here would be x. So I'm going to take out an x. And I'm left with 3x plus 4. Then I set both of these equal to 0. So x is equal to 0. 3x plus 4 is equal to 0. And I solve. So x is equal to 0. I already solved. We're good there. We want to solve the other one. I'm going to subtract 4 on both sides. So 3x is equal to negative 4. And then divide by 3. So x is equal to negative 4 over 3. So that's the second answer, but I also need to find the y's that go along with it. So I want to plug it in. To y. No, plug it into x to find y. So I'm going to plug it into the second equation because it looks a little bit easier. I'm going to start with my x is equal to 0. So I'm plugging that into x. So this would be 0 squared plus y is equal to 2. 0 squared is just 0. So y is equal to 2. So my point here would be 0, 2. Now we're going to plug in negative 4 over 3 into the x in the same equation, just because that one looks easier. This one's going to be a little bit harder to plug in because it's a fraction, but we know how to multiply and add fractions, so it's fine. So I have negative 4 over 3 squared plus y is equal to 2. When you square a fraction, you want to make sure you square the top and the bottom. So negative 4 squared would be 16, and 3 squared is 9. So 16 over 9 plus y is equal to 2. Got to move that 16 over 9 to the other side, so subtract 16 over 9. So I have a whole number minus a fraction. In order to add or subtract fractions, we need a common denominator. So I'm going to make this 2 over 1, and then I need to multiply the top and the bottom by 9. So it's 18 over 9. So 18 minus 16 would be 2 over 9. The denominator stays the same. You just subtract the top. So it's 18 minus 16. Denominator stays 2. So that would be my y. I just have to write my answer as a point. So it would be negative 4 over 3, 2 over 9. So these are my two solutions. Don't forget to turn in the notes before the end of the class period. And then once you turn in the notes, you can start working on the homework. Our test is going to be on Thursday this week, and this will not be on the test. The test is going to be just like how it would have been last week when we would have had it, but the hurricane happened. So it'll be on 1.2, 2.1, and 2.2. So this is not going to be on the test, but we just got to keep learning. So that's why we're going to do this now.